Hello. I find it really moving when I'm reading a book and it begins addressing questions and issues that I myself, both consciously and unconsciously, have been asking myself and wrestling with for a really long time. Big things like, what obligation do I have to make the world a better place? Or can I try to live as independently as possible? Is it better to minimize my impact upon the world, or should I actively labor to try to improve it? And what obligations do I have to friends and families and partners, or can I just work for my own betterment and happiness and contentment? And of course, there's no easy answers to all of these things. And I go back and forth thinking about them from day to day, or just from moment to moment. And it is something that the protagonist of this novel, Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, isn't just contemplating, but she is actively working through these issues, because at the very beginning of the novel, she has removed herself from her normal everyday life and left her husband and her job working in species conservation and her home to live fairly remotely in this remote retreat alongside a group of nuns, and to just exist there. And so there isn't a lot of plot or things going on in this book, but there also kind of is, like, under the surface, but also like actively in the day-to-day lives of this convent and the people that work with this group of nuns. There is a lot happening there. And I was initially going to film this video out in my garden shed, because I thought, oh, that's a kind of like isolated place. It kind of mimics the environment of this novel. But then found, like, very coincidentally, that my garden shed has been overrun with wasps, and so I couldn't sit in there. And I've called an exterminator, and he's gonna come and hopefully try to take care of the nest. That's just outside of my shed, and this really neatly mimics the one of the central things about this novel, because this retreat and this place where she is gone to live is being steadily overrun by mice, and increasingly over the course of the book, more and more mice start invading this landscape and the structures that they live in. And so it becomes almost like a horror story in some ways, in that sometimes they'll be looking at an object or the wall, or a character will go into a car and find that the seat beneath them is just moving because there are so many mice here. But of course, it's not just about this creepy aspect of their environment being taken over by mice, but it's about how this is a signal of and effect of climate change. But also, these mice are symbolic of a much bigger thing. It's about how death will come for these characters, kind of no matter what choices they make and what decisions they make about their lives, concerning these big questions about existence and how we should live our lives. And also the mice, another reviewer talked about this, about how the mice are kind of like the central character's memories, which just keep which invade upon her consciousness and in her everyday life in ways that she can't expect. So we follow her in her day-to-day existence as she is living in this space for years, even though she first came here not expecting to stay here for a very long time, but just finds that she continues to live here and has removed herself from the rest of the world. And as she is living there, all of these big questions start naturally occurring around her and taking different forms in the different people she meets and the memories she has concerning her life, and how she is still grieving for her lost parents, even though they died a number of years ago. She remarks how, the grieving process never really ends. She still misses them, especially her mother, at different points in her life, and is contemplating how her mother herself made a lot of decisions about her life, did a lot of charitable work and worked with other people herself, but in the end, how much change was she able to actually affect, and how helpful was this actually? And this is something that this central character wrestles with herself, and asking herself, and has gotten to this space of like almost despair of thinking that the world's problems are so big that there's not a lot that she can do to actually change this. And so I found this really moving, how it contemplates all of these things. But there's also another character called Helen Perry, who's a nun, who's a kind of star nun that comes to stay with this group, partly in order to be there for the burial of another nun who literally gave up her life trying to assist women who were affected by domestic abuse, and trying to protect them and assist them and help them, and who is given her life for this. And then Helen Perry, she is a woman who is working so actively to try to affect change in the world. But then at the same time, this character, she lives in such an isolated way, and a lot of the other nuns and people at this institution, they kind of resent her, and so she is kind of friendless in this really somber way. But also the central character, she knew Helen Perry when Helen Perry was younger, and went to school with her, and witnessed how Helen Perry experienced so much bullying and abuse. And as the novel goes on, we find out her story is even more tragic than the central character even realized, as we learn more about her past and her relationship with her mother. And there are these provide kind of counterpoints to the central character's own life in different modes of existence, as well as a number of other periphery characters. There's another character that's come to live at this place, and we find out that she left her children and her home to live there. And so it's almost like feels like a kind of human sin to leave one's children. But then it's kind of contemplating, well, what obligation do people have to their children? And so it's thinking about all of these different ways of living and existing in the world, and our own personal obligations. And because of the choices we make, it naturally forms different layers of guilt in our lives, because we can't help contemplating and thinking back and thinking, oh, if I'd made different choices, maybe that would have helped this person that was suffering at the time, or maybe it would have improved my own life in different ways. And thinking about how we wrestle with all of these choices on a day-to-day level, I found this incredibly moving to read as a very contemplative and meditative story that is working through all of these really big issues. And so I really enjoyed just following the narrator's consciousness as she's working through all these things and having these interactions, and really contemplating all of these issues on a very deep level, and how naturally a lot of these big issues that she's wrestling with, they touch upon many aspects of faith, and how often in faith and religions people are working through these things. And we see how the nuns here are working through all of these issues, but she is someone that doesn't have faith herself, but is sort of like skirting around people that are wrestling with these issues, but through the lens of religion and faith. And it's something that I've like contemplated myself for a really long time. Like a good friend of mine is a vicar and does a lot of charitable work and works with the community in a really tirelessly way to try to affect change, both on like a local and larger level, but also sometimes when there's a really big tragedy occurs in the world, she organizes prayer groups where people go to sit and contemplate and pray to hopefully enact change. And part of me like gets frustrated with this, like, well, wouldn't it be better to more actively, try to enact change in the world? But as the narrator finds, she is confronted by how the nuns, their prayer and their periods of contemplation are an active part of changing the world for them, that it's this deep period of communing both with themselves and with the larger world and with the spirituality that they believe in. And so I found it really moving how it confronts a lot of these things that we as individuals wrestle with both in small and large ways in our everyday lives. And so, yeah, what a beautiful and contemplative novel. And I think it's just so wonderfully written. It's very atmospheric in creating this landscape of Australia in New South Wales, and this very local place, which in some ways grows claustrophobic, but then in other ways it feels like it can be completely expansive and provides this like refuge of freedom for all of the characters, but also how it's contemplating time on a different level, because on one level, the central character of this, it feels like she has all the time in the world because she has stripped herself of any obligations except her day-to-day existence of living and nourishing herself and just getting by. But then at the same time, it feels like death is just around the corner and might take her at any moment. And the mice are a reminder of this, and also the body of the nun that is returned to this location to be buried is a reminder of this. And so mortality, feels like this really fragile thing and gives a very different perspective on time, since she has removed herself from normal everyday existence. And part of what has endeared me to this novel is that one of my favorite books of all time is Anne Tyler's novel Ladder of Years, which is such a powerful story about a character who she leaves her everyday life and her family and her home to just move in and read all day long, because that is what she aspires to do. And it's contemplating this issue that I think a lot of readers of us have, that given an ideal situation, we would just leave our lives, we would just exist and read all day long, and we can get slightly idealistic about this, because I think if you actually were able to do this, and as the character finds this in this novel, that's not really a solution and isn't an ideal way of living, because we have to have human connection, and we have to be part of a community on some level, because we can't just exist on our own. And I think that is what this novel works through in such a meaningful way. So I loved reading this story and found it a very moving experience. And I keep thinking about the characters like Helen Perry and a number of the other different characters and the choices that they make. And I'm kind of comparing it with my own choices in life and thinking about these larger issues. So if you have read this book, I would love to know what you think about it. And if you're interested in reading it now, please let me know. And if you would recommend anything else by Charlotte Wood. I've been meaning to read her novel The Weekend for a really long time, so I'd like to get to that as well as her other work. And I hope it does well in book prizes, because I think it is such a strong and powerful novel. So thank you for watching me go off about this book and meditate about all of these like much bigger things. And I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.